Hey guys, this is Tim. This is Daily Damage. Daily Damage is a live stream. I'm with Tabletop Terrors, where we believe that everyone can be more creative, and we use tabletop games to prove it. Today, we're going to destroy the elves of your world and give you at least 3 usable world building tips along the way. So stay tuned. Especially at the end of the stream, I'm going to give you a world building challenge regarding the DROW. So you don't want to miss that. Now, let's start right away. Let's get into the nitty gritty. I want to talk to you a little bit about a campaign world that I'm a part of. It's called Dragon Grin. But first, I want to give you a super rock and roll quote about elves. Actually, you know what? No, what am I talking about? First, we need to do a Tabtarian toast. Everyone raise your drinks with me. May you mend the first break. May you kill the first snake. And may you conquer everything you undertake. Slancha. So, now we can get to a quote from Terry Pratchett about elves. So, elves are wonderful. They provoke wonder. Elves are marvelous. They cause marvels. Elves are fantastic. They create fantasies. Elves are glamorous. They project glamour. Elves are enchanting. They weave enchantment. Elves are terrific. They beget terror. See that there? See, the thing about words is that meanings can twist just like a snake. And if you want to find snakes, look for them behind words that have changed their meaning. Elves can be deadly. They can be visceral. Let's make some terrifying elves today. Okay. A campaign world that I helped to write with my brother James and the other guys at Absolute Tabletop is called Dragon Grin. Primer, very quickly, evil has won in the world, and things aren't as bad as you'd think. That was about 20 years ago in world. So I want to focus on a specific kind of elf today, the Dorsi. Okay, let's talk about who they are, where they're from, how they can fit into your campaign world, and how they fit into the campaign world of Dragon Grin. But this is a live stream. This is Daily Damage, so let's take it to the chat. We got a lot of awesome people here. Alexander Kostick says, sup? Thomas Carpenter says, hello. Dave Hubble, howdy, howdy. Scott Hustis says, hello, everyone. Thomas Carpenter says, I'm excited to hear more about your elves ever since your podcast when you talked about them. Alexander Kostick, wait, is the wood paint considered to be a drink? Pratchett, love. Nathan Thurston, damage. Nathan, I got to get with you on the Copper Jackals program. I haven't forgotten about that. Okay, so the Dorsi elves. I want to give you this idea. First of all, clear your shelf, because we're not talking about the high elves of your world. We're building an entirely new elf. What we can't be snowflakey about it. I don't want this to be unusable or so weird and alien that they don't fit in the ecology of the world. So here's the way that you need to think about the Dorsi elves. The Dorsi elves are water elves. But don't check out with me. I'm not talking about pirates. I want you to think of elves that swim in the deep. Elves whose kingdom is underwater. The Dorsi elves have these noxious gills. They are essentially taking the role of the DROW in our world to a degree. But don't forget, at the end of this video, we're going to do a DROW world building challenge. So stay tuned, because I'm going to tell you something interesting about the DROW of our world, and you don't want to miss that. So, here are a couple of things that I think you really need to think about when you're world building elves and you're talking about how they're going to play I think a pivotal role in the world. For the Dorsi elves, one of the main things is I wanted them to be terrifying, okay? So how do you make elves terrifying? That's kind of what we're talking about. To me, let's look at some of the basic tenets of what they are and then apply them to this underwater, almost Lovecraftian elven race. The first thing is, there are going to be tons of Dorsi. I want to make it so that there are, because they live so long and because they're fierce warriors, they're in droves and numbers. Imagine like Tyranids from the Warhammer universe, or the Zerg, but then make them elves. They are as numerous as the stars and as black as the space between them. So that's the first thing. And then if they live this long, we have to think they can train longer. So when you're talking about Dorsi elves that are ancient and they've lived for a really long time, these elves are excellent at combat because they've seen many wars. They've been able to train for years and years. So two things you need to decide about your world is, what are we going to do here? Well, the first thing, I want to make these Dorsi elves extremely, like I said, prolific. Tons of them. The second thing, they're excellent warriors, so they're extremely deadly. Okay? Now, as far as the world building, what about your elves? How many elves are there in your world? This matters. Are there many, whether you're talking about high elves, any of those other popular kinds of elves, wood elves, things like that? How many are there? And then also, are they excellent at combat, and are they... I would say you need to decide how bloodthirsty they are. What are their codes, their tenets? I want the Dorsi elves to be absolutely visceral. I want you to imagine almost just these pale elves. And the longer they spend on land, the more their skin begins to crack and dry. So if you want to have a player character who goes away from their sunken city, which we'll get to in a minute, that player character becomes more and more horrific because their skin begins to crack and peel and look painfully dry, and their gills begin to scale over and so on. Let's look at the chat here. Hey from Washington State, says Rebecca. Brandon McMillan says, give me that sweet world building. Josh Glisson, your toast reminds me of one of my grandpa's Kentuckyisms. Don't wade no dry banks, nor kill no dead snakes. He'd say that when people left. No clue what it means. Yeah, man. Thomas Carpenter says, they're still craggy above water, right? Josh Glisson, the branches. Thomas Carpenter says, my wood elves are savage Aztecs Mayans. Perfect. I think this is going to help you because we're going to take a couple of things and kind of work it into why are they terrifying? How do they attack? How do they stay in power? And then a little bit of the lore, which is what I really want to do. And then we'll get to the drow stuff. Joshua James Larkin says, good morning from Australia. Excited to catch a stream. Just started and about to start my first campaign as a DM from my home group. I'm deep into world building right now. You're going to absolutely love this. Alexander Kostick. I don't have elves in my world. Something similar I have are Atlanteans, and they are crazy in their dreams. Thomas Carpenter says, I use 3 basics plus my own. Drow, desert elves, who are samurai, wood elves, Aztec Mayan, and I haven't decided my high elves yet. So, let's talk about the Dorsi. The Dorsi are, well, here, let me say this. Where do your elves come from? And there are a lot of different places that the elves can come from. They could be related to the other races. Maybe they're not related to the other races. For us, our elves come from what we call the Fey Mists. What are the Fey Mists? Well, in our world, it's the Feywild. I just wanted to have something that was specific to our world, so it's the Fey Mists. So, the Dorsi elves, essentially, and I haven't figured out the exact reason, but I think it would be awesome if the greatest warriors of the Fey were charged with guarding this gate. Now, this gate is essentially the biggest opening to the Shadowfell, or in our world it's called the Desolation. It's underwater, and so they constructed for these warriors this gate, this city-sized gate, to place over this wound in the Shadowfell. Now, this was millennia ago, and these warriors were tasked with guarding the gate. So the Dorsi elves, over time, and by being exposed to this evil, vile magic of the Desolation, slowly begin to twist and turn. And the city itself, it's called Aquianus. This city of Aquianus began to sort of twist as well. And so what I think would be super cool is that if there was this sort of Lovecraftian vibe that has developed over the millennia, over the centuries. So what was once this awesome elven gate, and imagine just that awesome sort of elven delicacy to the plate and the way that they have intricacy to their armor, and then warp it and then make it so that there's very similar to pronounce it however you want, R'lyeh or R'lyeh, basically the sunken city in H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. Now, in the story, it's a sunken city in the South Pacific, but it's a prison to Cthulhu. And to me, I want to really play off of that. And I think by putting this gate on top of this Shadowfell or this desolation and having these people, these elves guard it, they've become twisted and more twisted, and their lives have been expanded, similar to Frodo when he had the ring on. And so that's why there's so many of them. And I really want to go to this nightmarish corpse of a city gate. Measureless eons of evil have started to sort of latch on, because the Shadowfell is essentially the Upside Down, right? It's the representation of our realm, but just turned and twisted. So to me, placing this gate on top of that has given it this tangible connection, this thing for the desolation to latch onto and start to manifest. So this place between our realms, it's the nothingness, it's the vast, loathsome, seeping darkness that's starting to kind of connect, and it's twisting this. So this gate city, which is Aquianus, is now a super dungeon. And the Dorsai are, they're his hordes, the hordes of this great sleeping creature. And again, we're talking seep down from the dark stars, Cthulhu sleeping between, the masses of essentially what is our realm and another realm. So over the course of time, these elves have become visceral, deadly, and that is why I say they kind of replaced the drow in our realm. Let's look at some of the comments here. All right. Thomas Carpenter says, Josh Glisson, great idea. I might have missed it. Oh, water elves that are ruthless should have black eyes like sharks. Okay, so they totally do. I think that what I think would be super cool is if they had that, in animes and things like that, where the eye like closes. So like their eye can close, or it can sort of have this white pin dot. This white, I'm talking tiny little pin of a dot. So what that means is, if they've been alive for a long time, they've been twisted, all these sorts of things, this should not only shape their anatomy so that they're a little more asymmetrical, they're a little more gangled, they're a little more just unsettling, but I also think that this should also affect the way that they attack, their mindset, their strategic ability. Now think about how terrifying it is too. Think about the age of an elf, and then think about the age of humans, and compare that to the experience. So a human man or woman around the age of 40 who's very experienced, maybe excellent in combat, probably can't be in peak physical condition, especially in medieval times, because unfortunately the lifespan was much shorter. So an elf, a Dorsai elf, who could be in peak physical condition and be around for hundreds of years, you're talking about now these generals who are leading these armies on the coasts, and they fight lean. I want you to think of them as like Genghis Khan's army, where they essentially, they fight light, they travel light, they all swim in packs, and they hop up onto the shores and they're raiding and doing those kinds of things. But they're led by these, like I said, these generals who have been around for a very long time, because to me, that's much more terrifying. Now, the other thing to consider is this. They attack at night because they understand a lot of creatures don't have dark vision. So these elven Dorsai tacticians would understand that if they just sent wave after wave, what they could do is, one, attack in the night and then retreat, or attack toward the middle or end of the day. The foe would come, begin fighting, and then guess what? The elves would fight into the night. Well, then the enemy wouldn't be able to see. And so like luring them in, using feigned retreats and things like this, I think this would be super terrifying. Let's see here. Brandon McMillan says, some of my elves don't have pointy ears. Instead, they cut their ears into points as a coming of age and eat the scraps. Wow. Dude, that's really cool. That would fit right in here. That's excellent. He says, if basically their souls didn't completely survive coming from the Fae and they're partially stored in a magic crystal they left in the Fae. That's a really neat concept. And so you could kind of plug that in too, as far as, you know, making your elves interesting or different. So how can you apply this stuff to your world? Well, one, decide where your elves came from, at least partially. You don't have to have this whole lineage, but thinking about where they came from and why they are where they are, very important. It gives them motives and I think realistic goals. I love the idea that the Dorsai elves are a group that started out with noble intentions to guard this gate and try to stop the desolation from bleeding out. And I think that still they have become the apex predator of the shadows. So I think that I would imagine they're at least neutral evil, but to me they're like the worst person. You know, they're like the, well, sorry, I'm thinking like they're the Dexter, essentially is what I was thinking. They're like the Dexter. They kill the worst things so that they don't get out and kill others. So some other things. Think about Elven Tactics. How do elves attack in your world? Do they use their dark vision to the advantage? How skilled are their generals and their fighters because they live so much longer? Do they use that to their advantage? Do they use barbaric tactics such as feigned retreats? And, you know, one of the things Genghis Khan used to do as well was all of the Mongols would have multiple horses. And the reason why they would do this is because they could get about 100 miles in a day by riding a horse and then getting on another horse, essentially, and then riding that one and get. So basically, they were sort of like boosting their processor. They were getting further, 100 miles in a day, so they would swoop in by night and crush enemies who were not even expecting it. Scott Hughes says, I'm thinking my elves came through several cracks in space and time that sometimes reappear. No one knows, not even them, if they come from our future, our past, or possibly even a different reality. And that's awesome. I think it's important to use the, and you could say it in any order you want, but when we're writing, what we think of in Dragongrin is, some say, many posit, others believe. You should have at least three, and it's the kind of world-building triangle. Don't define one thing one way, because that's not real life. Perception is reality. So some say the elves are from the Fae Mists. Many posit that they actually were here before the world was created, but others believe that the elves are from the future and they've come back. And then that way, the Dungeon Master and the players can kind of decide, because history and reality isn't that clean and divisive, I don't think. Nathan Warren, downturned elf ears. Josh Glisson, infant mortality rate, lowered life expectancy. Alexander Kostick, the most venerable elves and warriors could have coral or shell-like chitin forming an exoskeleton around their body. So the oldest one would have merged with the depths to cover huge areas, making their senses incredibly precise. Dude, I love this. Let's invent this on the spot. Okay. I love living armor, sentient armor. So what I want to do, we got to make this like Lovecraftian. We got to make this bizarre sort of, like I said, that R'lyeh, that cyclopean masonry. So we need to create insanely just xenified, insane coral. So I want coral. Come on, coral. What I want to do is, it's this dark black coral, but it's carnivorous. So it's this coral that's carnivorous and it grows very quickly. So what they have to do to get this armor, you essentially, when you start out, you get it on your chest. It's this, it looks like a mollusk, like one of those trilobites, and it's just like right in the center of your chest, and it slowly sort of eats you. It's a very slow process, but it slowly starts to eat you. And you have to prove yourself strong enough to regenerate fast enough, essentially, so that this thing can constantly stay alive. So that thing begins to grow and manifest, and it slowly starts like growing up you and become, like I said, this kind of sharp Lovecraftian coral that grows around them. So like you said, when truly, because in our world it's called the drowned elves, when a drowned elf general steps onto the land. They should look like they're fully decked out in this coral Mordor armor. And I think that would be super sick. So really, really cool idea, Alexander. Scott Houston says, great advice. Awesome, man. Yeah, that's really helped me out, especially because a lot of people ask us questions about our campaign world. And the truth is, it's not as easy as one answer, and nor should it be. So, awesome. So, I told you guys that if you stay till the end of the stream, we talked a lot about the Dorsai Elves of Dragongrin. First of all, what would you do if you had aquatic elves, if you had these elves that were basically these Lovecraftian coast-raiding devils? You know, what would you do? How would you use them? Or what would you change? Would you make your aquatic elves different? Would you make them more regal, etc.? But I talked to you about a world-building challenge for the DROW, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So, the DROW, arguably one of the most iconic things that Gary Gygax created outside of the game Dungeons & Dragons itself. And also, I mean, one of the most one of the most... I want to be careful. Okay, I'll say this. Hotly contested. One of the most polarizing. We'll say it that way. Because some people love DROW, some people hate them. Some people pronounce it DROW, and some people argue with people that don't pronounce it DROW. So, love it or hate it, the idea of the DROW connected, and it's dug its roots in, and it has been a part of Dungeons & Dragons since, you know, I think, since Gary Gygax invented them in their different iterations. So, the DROW in your world. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out something different than the Lolth mythology. If you're watching this, you don't know what I'm talking about. A very baseline layman's explanation is the DROW and their entire society is based around this demon goddess Lolth. And she is an arachnid in her form, and so there's a lot of that spider imagery and stuff with the DROW. Let's reinvent the DROW, okay? And I want to know how you're going to do that. What's different about them? Why are they underground, okay? I want to take that even a step further, because I'm going to do another stream later this week to tell you about how we envision the DROW of Dragongrin. But to me, I want to know what you're doing differently. Where do they dwell? How do they operate? Are they feared, revered? Are they loved? So this world building challenge is to come up with something unique and interesting with the DROW and do it differently. Make your world different in its manifestation of the DROW. So let's talk about that. Let's see here. All right. Brand McMillan says, that would be fantastic. You see a coral reef, occasionally gooey eyes open on it and stare at you. You begin to hear whispers in your mind as if underwater wasn't spooky enough. Exactly, man. Dude, that now I'm thinking of this imagery of an entire wall of coral. And it just begins to slowly sort of drop off. These warriors begin to drop off, and they've got these sharpened, like, just Leviathan teeth spears. Joshua James Larkin says they could carve the coral into partially formed ornate armor plating. The coral forms... No, it allows for armor and accessories that are very different from the limitations of metal and leather armor. Yeah, man, and you got to make it this crazy hard, scrapey, like... Because I imagine, too, they're very good at close combat. Think of them as, like, knowing Krav Maga. So they're like the Israeli Special Forces. They get in there, and they're just rubbing this sharp coral, like cutting throats with a shoulder pad. Like, go that route, for me anyway. Super barbaric, super close quarters, and just all... dank. Let's see here. Josh Gleason says, DROW aren't evil, just nocturnal. Okay, prove it. Prove it in your world. Because I want to see how you do this, what you do. This has been an awesome stream. Feel free to ask any questions. Comment below. And if you want to be uncommonly good at D&D and hyper creative, that's what we're all about here at Tabletop Terrors. Be sure to subscribe and like us on Facebook. I will actually say this. Huzzah! We passed 1,000 likes on Facebook, so that's pretty awesome. But we love you guys. This is going to be the end of the stream. I'm excited to see what you do with the DROW, and later this week, we're going to meet up and we're going to talk about how the DROW operate in Dragongrin. But until next time, may your dice roll high.